The young man sat rigid in the courtroom, his crutches planted firmly on the polished wooden floor. His face was set with a look of fierce determination, yet behind those eyes, there was a flicker of pain. Pain from the injury that had brought him here, to this room filled with power and secrets. His light skin contrasted sharply with the dark suit jacket he wore, the fabric slightly wrinkled from the tense moments leading up to this day. The collar of his light-colored shirt was crisp, but the tie was loosened just enough to show he was not entirely comfortable, not entirely at ease. Despite the difficulty moving, he sat upright, facing directly forward, as if daring the room to underestimate him. The courtroom was vast, grand in its wooden paneling and high ceilings, giving off an air of authority. Dozens of figures sat in rows, their suits and ties blending into a sea of dark colors. Lawyers, officials, and witnesses, all watching him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The atmosphere was thick with silence, broken only by the faint rustling of papers and the occasional whisper. The air was tense, as if everyone in the room was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. In front of him, a large wooden table stretched across the room, its polished surface gleaming under the moderate lighting. It was the focal point of the scene, symbolizing justice but also the weight of the moment. The young man's eyes, sharp and unwavering, never left that table. He knew what this was about, more than just a court case. It was about truth, about power, and about a secret that could change everything. The judge's gavel had just fallen, signaling the start of the hearing, but the young man felt the weight of silence pressing down on him even more. His mind raced, recalling everything that had led to this day, every secret uncovered, every lie exposed, every threat and promise made in the shadows. He clenched his fists around his crutches, forcing himself to stay steady. His injury was a visible reminder of how much he had already sacrificed to stand here. Suddenly, a voice broke through the quiet, calm, deliberate, commanding. It was the prosecutor, a sharp woman with piercing eyes, who looked directly at him. "You understand," she said, "that your testimony today could change everything. Are you ready to face what's coming?" He responded without hesitation, his voice steady despite the pain. "I am. I've come too far to turn back now." The room grew silent again, and the judge nodded slowly, signaling that the proceedings would begin. But just as the first witness was called, the young man's eyes flickered to the side, where a figure in the crowd shifted slightly. A man, cloaked in shadow, watching him intently. The young man's heart skipped a beat. He had seen that face before, someone who had haunted his past, someone who knew the truth he was fighting to reveal. A sudden rush of adrenaline surged through him. He realized then that this was no ordinary court case. It was a battle for his life, for the truth he held in his hands. And he knew, whatever was coming next, it would change everything forever. As the first witness stepped forward, the young man adjusted his grip on the crutches and prepared himself for what might be the most important moment of his life. Because, in this room, amid the silence and shadows, he was about to unlock a secret that could shake the very foundations of the world, and once it was out, there was no turning back. The young man's eyes narrowed as the witness began to speak, their words weaving a tangled web of lies and truths. Every sentence felt like a knife slicing through the silence, each detail carefully crafted to hide the real story. He clenched his fists around his crutches, feeling the sharp ache in his injured leg remind him of how far he had come and how much was still at stake. The shadowy figure in the crowd shifted again, and this time their gaze met his. There was an unspoken challenge there, a silent warning that the game was far from over. Suddenly the room grew colder, and a faint crackling sound broke the tense atmosphere. All heads turned toward the judge, whose expression was unreadable. The gavel rose and fell sharply, commanding silence. Then, with a voice that cut through the room like a blade, the judge said, "Order in the court." His eyes lingered on the witness, who hesitated for a moment before continuing. But the young man knew this was only the beginning. Something Bigger was about to surface, something that would change everything. As the witness finished, a hush fell over the courtroom. The young man leaned slightly forward, his eyes sharp and unwavering. He knew his moment was coming. The truth was close, so close he could almost taste it. His mind raced through the evidence he had gathered, the lies he had uncovered, and the risks he had taken just to be here. Every step had led him to this point, and he could feel the weight of destiny pressing down on him. Then, unexpectedly, the room was filled with an ominous silence as a new figure entered. Not a witness, but someone from the shadows, someone who had been lurking in the background, watching, waiting. The young man's eyes widened in recognition. It was the very person he'd been trying to find, the one who knew more than anyone else about the secret he was desperate to reveal. The figure paused at the edge of the courtroom, eyes locking onto his with a mixture of menace and resolve. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He knew this was no coincidence. That figure's presence meant everything was about to change. The game was about to reach its climax, and he had only one choice: to trust that this person's truth could finally bring everything into the light, or to hold back and risk losing everything he fought for. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of his conviction. "I'm ready," he said. "Let's end this." And as he spoke, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the truth to explode into the open, threatening to shatter the very foundations of everything they believed in. The moment was here, and nothing could stop what was coming next. The figure in the shadows took a step forward, revealing a face that was both familiar and unsettling. It was someone the young man had hoped to find but never truly believed he would see in this place. Someone who held the key to unlocking the entire mystery. The room's air grew thick with anticipation, every eye fixed on this pivotal moment. The stranger's gaze lingered on him for a moment, then slowly shifted to the gathered crowd, as if weighing whether to speak or stay silent. Then, with a voice that echoed softly but carried undeniable authority, the stranger finally spoke. "You've all been led to believe certain truths," they said, voice steady but tinged with urgency. "But what you don't know is that the real story is much darker, and it's been hidden for years. I've come here to reveal the truth, and I've brought proof." The courtroom suddenly buzzed with whispers, confusion, and suspicion. The young man's heart pounded faster. This was the moment he had been waiting for, yet a part of him wondered if this revelation would do more harm than good. The stranger reached into their coat pocket and withdrew a small sealed envelope. Carefully, they broke the seal and spread out the contents on the table: photos, documents, and recordings, evidence that shone in the dim light. The room fell silent again as everyone leaned in, eyes wide with shock and curiosity. The young man's eyes darted across the evidence, recognizing some of the faces and places he had only glimpsed in whispers or nightmares. This was the truth he had been seeking, but now that it was out in the open, he realized it was far more dangerous than he had imagined. Suddenly, a loud voice rang out from the back of the room. It was a voice of authority commanding silence. The judge's gavel struck the wood with a resounding crack. "Order," he demanded. "What is the meaning of this? Who are you, and why have you brought this evidence here today?" The stranger looked directly at the judge, unflinching. "I am someone who has nothing to lose," they replied firmly. "And I am here because the truth must be known. The lies that have been kept hidden for years threaten to destroy everything, unless we expose them now." The courtroom was silent again, but inside the young man felt a storm brewing. This was the turning point, the moment when the entire game shifted. Everything he believed in, everything he fought for, was about to be tested by forces far beyond what he had imagined. His grip on the crutches tightened as he stared at the evidence laid before him. The truth was no longer a distant hope. It was now in the open, blazing like a fire that could burn down the entire house of lies. And he knew, deep inside, that once this revelation reached its peak, nothing would ever be the same again. The battle for justice, for freedom, was just beginning, and he was ready to face whatever came next. As the weight of the revelations settled over the courtroom, a tense silence draped like a shroud. The stranger's words had ignited a spark of chaos, and every eye was fixed on the unfolding chaos. The judge, eyes narrowing, raised his gavel once more, commanding order. But even as he did, whispers erupted from the crowd, some in disbelief, others in anger or fear. The young man, clutching his crutches tightly, felt a strange mixture of hope and dread ripple through him. This was the moment of truth, the culmination of everything he had fought for, yet also the beginning of an unpredictable storm. Suddenly, a figure burst through the courtroom doors, breathless and wild-eyed. It was a messenger carrying an urgent note. Without waiting for permission, they hurried to the judge, passing the paper forward. The judge unfolded it carefully, reading the hastily scrawled words that seemed to turn the tide entirely. His face hardened as he looked up, voice echoing through the chamber. "This changes everything. We have new evidence, conclusive proof that will alter the course of this case." Murmurs rose again, this time tinged with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The stranger, now visibly more confident, stepped back slightly and gestured toward the young man. "The truth is out," they declared, "and it's only the beginning. What we do next will determine not just the outcome of this trial, but the future of everyone involved." The young man's eyes darted across the faces before him, those who believed, those who doubted, and those who were afraid. He knew that the revelations had opened a Pandora's box, releasing secrets that could not be contained. Every moment felt suspended in time as the courtroom waited for the next move. Then, unexpectedly, a stern voice cut through the murmur. It was the prosecutor, stepping forward with a determined look. "If what's been presented is true," he said, "then we cannot ignore it. Justice must be served regardless of the consequences." The judge nodded solemnly. "We will review this new evidence thoroughly, but make no mistake, this case is far from over." The courtroom's atmosphere shifted again. The stakes had been raised, and the game was entering a new, even more dangerous phase. The young man looked around, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. All his doubts, fears, and hopes coalesced into a single resolve. Whatever happened next, he was determined to see the truth come to light. As the court prepared to deliberate, he took a deep breath, knowing that the path ahead would be fraught with peril, but also that he was closer than ever to uncovering the secrets that could change everything forever. The story was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning.